Imagine for a second a man standing right in the center of his city, and he is just completely isolated.
Completely alone.
Yeah, alone. Like the most powerful political and economic leaders of his society have basically organized this massive, highly coordinated public relations campaign against him.
A total smear campaign.
Right. They are telling anyone who will listen, foreign merchants, pilgrims, local citizens, that this man is clinically insane. They're saying he's a madman, he's dangerous, and his defense against this overwhelming societal rejection isn't like a lightning bolt from the sky.
No, it's not some big supernatural display.
Exactly. It's not a miraculous display of power at all. His defense, at least according to the text we're looking at today, is an inkstand.
An inkstand and a pen.
Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
It's good to be here.
So today, you and I are plunging into a very specific, honestly incredibly potent slice of ancient wisdom. We're looking at chapters 67 through 77 of the Qur'an.
Yeah, a really dense, fascinating section.
And I want to clarify for you listening, our source material here isn't just, a surface-level translation of the text. We have this extensive, rigorously researched, scholarly commentary that decodes the highly poetic, deeply metaphorical language of these early chapters.
Because you really need that decoder ring, so to speak, to get what's actually going on.
Right. So to kick us off, what is the overarching theme binding this specific collection of chapters together?
So the core theme here is this concept of spiritual resurrection.
Spiritual resurrection.
Yeah. It is, it's really an exploration of how a human being actually wakes up. Like internally.
Wakes up to what exactly?
Well, the text sets up this really striking fiction between the flawless mathematical order of the physical cosmos, the stars and planets, and the chaotic, messy, often highly destructive moral choices that we make down here on Earth.
Like gravity works perfectly, but human morality is just a disaster.
Exactly, yeah. So it's attempting to bridge that gap. It's urging the listener toward this radical kind of social justice, deep internal introspection, and honestly, an endurance that kind of defies modern psychology.
But to understand the mechanics of that spiritual resurrection, we can't really just start with abstract theology, right?
No, absolutely not. It doesn't work out of context.
Right. We have to start with the human being at the center of this narrative, who is experiencing this intense pressure cooker environment.
It's vital. The historical context here is critical because these words, they weren't spoken in a vacuum.
Right.
They were spoken by a man standing entirely alone against a deeply, deeply hostile society.
And we're looking primarily at chapters 68, 73, and 74 to begin with here.
Yeah.
So just set the scene for us. What is actually happening in Mecca during this early period?
Okay, so you have to picture Mecca not just as like a religious center, but as a thriving, cutthroat economic hub.
Like the Wall Street of its day, kind of.
Kind of, yeah. The power structure, the societal elite, they relied heavily on the status quo to maintain their wealth. And the prophet is receiving this revolutionary message, and it threatens that status quo entirely.
Because it's calling for equality and charity.
Right. So the commentary specifically identifies influential figures orchestrating the pushback. You have men like Walid bin Mughira and Abu Jahl, and they weren't just, casual critics shouting in the street.
They were organized.
They were political masterminds running a highly calculated smear campaign to basically discredit the message before it could disrupt their economy and their social hierarchy.
I noticed in the commentary that they couldn't even agree on a consistent narrative, which I found fascinating. Like one day they're telling pilgrims he's just a poet, the next day they claim he's a soothsayer, and then they land heavily on this accusation of madness that he's possessed or unhinged.
Yeah, well, desperation creates inconsistency, right? But they were throwing every possible label at the wall, just hoping one would stick enough to isolate him. And, the psychological toll of that isolation is vividly captured in the text.
Oh, man, yeah.
Like in chapter 73, he is addressed as Al-Muzammil, which means the wrapped up.
The wrapped up.
Yeah. And in chapter 74, Al-Mudassir, the clothed one.
And that's not just a poetic metaphor, is it?
No, the imagery is intensely physical. He is literally wrapping himself in a heavy cloak, seeking the darkness and the solitude of his home to just escape the crushing weight of this public rejection.
There is a paradox here that just feels deeply relevant today. Like, we have mapped the human genome, we've built artificial intelligence, and yet our psychological hardware remains practically identical to a man sitting in the desert centuries ago.
Nothing has changed in how we process trauma.
Exactly. When the world is hostile, when every voice on, social media or in your office is screaming that you are a failure or a fraud, the visceral human instinct is still to pull the covers over our heads.
We retreat. We want to be wrapped up.
We just want to hide. And yet, if I'm reading the commentary correctly, there was another layer to his distress, right? Beyond just the public mockery. There was this thing called the fatra.
Right, the fatra. And that is perhaps the most agonizing element of this entire early period. It refers to a pause, like an intermission in the revelations.
Wait, so the divine communication just stopped?
Completely. For a period of time, some historians suggest months, the divine connection seemed to go completely silent.
Oh, wow. So imagine stepping out into the public square, staking your entire reputation, your life, on this profound truth you've received, facing total social ruin.
And then the voice guiding you just goes quiet.
That's terrifying.
It really is. The silence from above, combined with the deafening hostility from below, it creates this intense psychological crucible. He retreated into the cloak because the mission felt impossible to carry in that silence.
I want to pause on that for a second because the text response to this retreat is, it's fascinating. It doesn't offer him a comforting platitude.
Not at all.
Chapter 74 issues this very blunt command. It says, "Arise and warn and purify your garments." If I'm translating this to the modern experience of deep burnout or, that desire to isolate with imposter syndrome, this is essentially ancient wisdom demanding that you get out of bed, clean yourself up, and face the friction of the world.
It refuses to let him stay in the cloak.
Right. It's like, no, you have to get back out there.
And the commentary makes a really profound philosophical point regarding this transition. It notes that the prophet is commanded to get out of solitude, quote, so as to make others perfect.
So as to make others perfect. Meaning he can't just fix himself in a vacuum.
Exactly. This tradition inherently rejects the idea that true spiritual maturity or perfection can be achieved by just hiding. You cannot reach the pinnacle of human morality by sitting in a cave on a mountain, meditating far away from the messiness of society.
Because it's easy to be peaceful when no one is bothering you.
Right. True morality is forged in the public square. It requires the friction of dealing with difficult people, facing injustice, and, maintaining your composure when you're being attacked.
Okay, so he arises. He steps out of the cloak. But he is still walking back into his society, calling him a madman. Which brings us back to the hook from the beginning. How does the text defend him?
Right, because they are demanding a physical miracle to prove he isn't crazy.
And chapter 68, the chapter titled The Pen, offers something completely different.
Yeah, chapter 68 begins by swearing an oath by the inkstand and the pen, and by what they write. In a society that highly prized oral poetry and fleeting rhetoric, the text points to the objective, rational permanence of the written word.
But it goes deeper than just writing, doesn't it?
It does. The text argues that the ultimate proof of his sanity and the truth of his message is his sublime morality.
His character is the evidence.
His character is the primary evidence. You have to remember, before the revelations even began, he was known throughout Mecca as Al-Amin, the trustworthy one.
Oh, right. So he already had that reputation.
Exactly. The ravings of a madman are chaotic. They contradict themselves. They're driven by ego and instability. The text points to the undeniable consistency of his life, his pristine ethical record, and the systematic, rational structure of the message being recorded by the pen.
So it basically strips away the demand for supernatural parlor tricks.
Yes, and grounds the defense in observable human integrity.
That's powerful. So when your own world feels chaotic today, when you're facing organized hostility or simply the loud critics in your own life, your defense isn't shouting back louder. Your defense isn't a PR campaign.
No.
It's the undeniable consistency of your daily actions and the objective quality of your work, your pen. The text seems to be arguing that truth, combined with sublime character, eventually outlasts any temporary smear campaign.
It's the long game. The long game of moral integrity versus the short game of social manipulation.
Yeah, that's incredibly relevant. So let's follow this narrative arc. He steps out of the cloak, armed with this unshakable character, and he begins to deliver the message. But the message doesn't start with, a list of rules for human behavior.
No, it takes a massive pivot.
It zooms all the way out to the mechanics of the cosmos.
It does, and this brings us to chapter 67, the kingdom. The text actively challenges the listener to look up at the physical universe. It references the seven heavens operating on flawless, uniform, divine laws.
And it uses a very specific word there, right?
Yes, the Arabic word used is future, which implies a flaw, a rift, or an incongruity. The text issues a direct dare. Look at the cosmos and then look again. Can you find a single flaw in its operation?
And the obvious answer is no. I mean, gravity doesn't take a day off. Planetary orbits don't deviate just because they feel like it. The physical universe operates as this seamless, unbroken machine.
Exactly.
But why establish this astrophysics baseline when you're trying to deal with human morality in a hostile city? What's the connection?
It's to establish the central friction of human existence. The physical universe obeys these laws seamlessly because it has no choice. It's deterministic.
Right.
Human beings, however, possess free will. We are the anomaly in the cosmos. We're not forced into uniform obedience like a star or a planet.
We can choose to defy gravity, metaphorically speaking.
Yes. Therefore, the text frames the entirety of human life and death as a deliberate trial to see, and this is a quote, which of you is best in deeds.
So we aren't just taking up space in the universe. The friction of choice is the entire point of our existence.
Exactly. The physical world has its unbreakable laws, but the moral world has its laws too. The tragedy is that we align with the physical laws out of necessity. We don't step off cliffs expecting to float, but we constantly rebel against the moral laws because we have the freedom to do so.
And that leads directly to chapter 75, the resurrection. Because if there are moral laws, there has to be a mechanism for detecting when we break them.
Right, an internal censor.
Yeah, and this chapter introduces a concept that I actually found incredibly jarring, the self-accusing spirit, or al-nafs al-lawama. The commentary describes this as a spiritual resurrection. I want to dig into the psychology of this because it feels like the core diagnostic tool of this entire ancient text.
It really is. It's the ultimate internal alarm system. The self-accusing spirit is essentially the birth of the conscience.
Okay.
It is that precise, often terrifying moment when a human being wakes up from their state of ignorance or denial and suddenly recognizes their own moral failings. And the text places so much value on this internal mechanism that it actually swears an oath by the self-accusing spirit.
See, I struggle with this part because modern society is practically engineered to destroy this mechanism.
Oh, absolutely.
If we feel that nagging guilt, that internal accusation, our immediate cultural instinct is to pathologize it or just numb it.
Yeah.
We scroll on our phones for 4 hours, we buy something on Amazon, we work 80-hour weeks.
Anything to drown out the noise.
Yeah. We build these incredibly sophisticated echo chambers, specifically designed to validate our flaws, so we never have to actually hear the self-accusing spirit.
We treat the self-accusing spirit as a glitch rather than a feature. Facing it requires admitting a fundamental flaw in our own internal universe, which completely shatters the ego's illusion of perfection.
I want to test an analogy here to see if it holds up against the text's intended meaning.
Sure, go for it.
Think about the biological mechanism of physical pain. If you rest your hand on a burning hot stove, the pain is excruciating. But that pain isn't a punishment. It's a vital life-saving mechanism. It's your body screaming at you to pull your hand away before the flesh is irreparably destroyed.
Okay, I see where you're going.
Is the text arguing that psychological guilt, the self-accusing spirit, functions as the exact same mechanism, just designed to save your humanity instead of your physical tissue?
That analogy aligns perfectly with the underlying logic of the commentary. Ignoring physical pain leads directly to the destruction of the physical body. Ignoring the self-accusing spirit leads directly to the destruction of the soul.
Wow.
The text insists that you cannot bypass this mechanism forever. In chapter 75, verses 14 and 15, it delivers this devastating psychological truth. Nay, man is evidence against himself, though he puts forth his excuses.
Though he puts forth his excuses, that is surgical. We are brilliant defense attorneys for our own worst behavior.
We really are. We construct elaborate rationalizations. We blame our upbringing, we blame the economy, we blame our political opponents.
Yeah, we always have reason.
Always. But the text argues that none of that external PR matters. Internally, the self-accusing spirit has already recorded the truth. The pain-receptor has already fired. You can lie to everyone around you, but you cannot successfully lie to your own soul on the ultimate day of reckoning.
So if the self-accusing spirit is the alarm bell, what is the specific fire it's warning us about? Because in my reading of these chapters, the ultimate moral failure isn't just an abstract theological error.
No, it's very practical.
Yeah, it's not just about believing the wrong concept in your head. The failure it highlights is deeply uncomfortably societal. It has everything to do with wealth, hoarding, and social justice.
To really understand the mechanics of this moral failure, we have to look closely at the parable of the garden in chapter 68. The text tells a very specific story about the owners of a wealthy, fruitful agricultural plot. They are preparing for the harvest, and they make a deliberate, strategic plan. They vow to harvest their crop in the early morning under the cover of darkness.
Okay, let's play devil's advocate here. If I'm a modern business owner reading this, I might think, well, they're just maximizing efficiency. They did the work, they own the land, they planted the seeds. Why shouldn't they harvest it whenever they want and keep their own profits?
Yeah.
Is the text suggesting that private ownership itself is flawed?
It isn't condemning the ownership of the garden at all. What it's condemning is the mechanism of hoarding. The commentary is very explicit about their motivation for the early morning harvest.
Why early morning?
They whispered to each other to go early specifically so that no poor man shall enter it today upon you.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. In that culture, it was a recognized right that the destitute could gather the gleanings or receive a portion of the harvest. These owners are actively conspiring to sever that social contract. They want 100% of the profit, and they are willing to use secrecy to deny the vulnerable their share.
So they believe they can just outsmart the spiritual economics of their society.
Exactly. And the consequence is immediate. While they are sleeping, completely secure in their calculated greed, a visitation from your Lord encompasses the garden.
A disaster hits it.
Right. They wake up, they sneak out to their fields to execute this brilliant plan, and they find the entire garden completely destroyed. It is reduced to black, barren land. In their obsessive attempt to hoard everything and cut off the ecosystem of charity, they lose absolutely everything.
This is a radical challenge to modern hyper-individualism. We operate in a hustle culture that basically teaches us to build higher walls around our wealth to maximize every single penny for ourselves. We equate hoarding with security.
The bigger the bank account, the safer you are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But this ancient wisdom posits the exact opposite. Hoarding is the mechanism of ruin.
The spiritual economics here operate on a totally different set of physical laws. Think of it like this. If you dam up a river completely to keep all the water for yourself, the water eventually stagnates, poisons the soil, and destroys the dam.
Yeah, the ecosystem needs flow.
Right. The text amplifies this dynamic in chapter 69 using incredibly intense, terrifying imagery. It describes a person being thrust into hell and bound with a chain of 70 cubits.
See, when you read 70-cubit chain, you automatically assume this person committed the most unspeakable atrocities, mass murder, treason, something horrific. But the text tells us exactly what the crime was, doesn't it?
It states it explicitly. Surely he did not believe in Allah the Great, nor did he urge the feeding of the poor.
Nor did he urge the feeding of the poor. Those two concepts are fused together.
They are inseparable. A lack of belief in the ultimate truth is functionally identical in its destructive consequences to a lack of societal care for the starving.
Wow.
The text absolutely refuses to allow a separation between the theological and the practical. Spirituality without social justice is depicted as entirely hollow. It's just a performance.
I want to translate this into a modern corporate scenario because it feels like a massive corporation obsessing over its quarterly profits. That's their harvest, right?
Right.
So to maximize those profits and ensure shareholder value, they secretly dump toxic waste into the local river, thinking they outsmarted the environmental regulations. They kept all the money. But over time, the ecosystem collapses. The local community gets sick, the massive lawsuits hit, and the company is bankrupted.
They lose the garden.
They lose everything because they ignored the interconnectedness of their environment. The text seems to be saying that spiritual ecosystems work the exact same way. You cannot poison the communal well and expect to drink clean water in your private mansion.
That is precisely the mechanism at work. And Chapter 70 actually diagnoses the root psychological cause of this behavior with brutal clarity.
What does it say?
It states that human beings are created with a hasty temperament. We are greatly grieved when evil afflicts, meaning we panic at the first sign of difficulty or loss.
We totally do.
And we are niggardly when good befalls us, meaning we instinctively clutch our successes and refuse to share. We are panicky and cheap by default.
That is a devastatingly accurate assessment of human nature. Just panicky and cheap. But it provides a cure, doesn't it?
It does. It says there is an exception to this hasty, hoarding nature. The exception is found in those who set aside a fixed portion of their wealth for those who beg and those who are denied good.
A fixed portion.
Notice the phrasing, yeah. A fixed portion. This isn't a random emotional donation made when a sad commercial comes on television and you feel a quick twinge of guilt. It is a structural, intentional, disciplined reallocation of your resources.
And the absolute pinnacle of this practice is described later in chapter 76, which frankly contains a gut punch for the human ego.
Chapter 76 describes the truly righteous. They feed the poor, the orphan, and the captive. But the revolutionary aspect is the internal motivation.
Right.
The text says they do it for the love of Him, and they explicitly declare to the people they are feeding, "We desire from you neither reward nor thanks."
Neither reward nor thanks. If we are honest with ourselves, how often do we do a good deed and secretly wait for the applause?
Almost always.
We want the tax write-off, we want the social media likes, or at the very least, we feel entitled to a profound expression of gratitude from the person we helped. And if they aren't grateful enough, we get offended.
How dare they not thank me?
Right. The practical question this ancient text forces upon the modern listener is this: can you give your resources, your time, or your expertise to someone who is in a position to offer you absolutely nothing in return? Not even a thank you. If you demand gratitude, you aren't truly giving. You're just buying an emotional transaction to feed your own ego.
The complete suppression of the ego's need for validation is the highest level of spiritual maturity described in these chapters.
Okay, so the practical application is clear. Feed the poor. Listen to the pain receptor of your conscience and don't hoard your garden. But if a modern listener is reading through this text independently, they are going to hit a massive obstacle.
The allegory.
The language shifts into this highly mystical, allegorical territory. If we read this like an engineering textbook, taking every single word literally, we're going to dismiss it as ancient mythology.
And this brings us to a critical hermeneutical concept: wisdom with discernment. The scholarly commentary we are using is invaluable here because it provides a highly rational, metaphorical interpretation of this complex imagery. It prevents us from getting stuck on the literal outer shell. Let's return to that chain of 70 cubits from chapter 69.
A literal 70-cubit iron chain waiting in a physical fire. It just sounds like standard, fear-based medieval imagery designed to scare peasants into submission.
If you read it literally, yes, that's exactly what it sounds like. But the commentary invites us to look at the mechanics of the metaphor. Consider that a standard, robust human lifespan is roughly 70 years.
Okay.
The commentary posits that if a person spends their life entirely in wickedness, hoarding wealth, ignoring the vulnerable, indulging in endless worldly entanglements and selfish desires, those very desires become the chain.
Wait, the desires themselves are the metal.
Precisely. Every year, wasted in selfishness forges a link. A 70-year life of unchecked greed creates a 70-link chain that binds the soul. You are not being punished by an external iron chain. You are being punished by your own accumulated desires. The things you thought you possessed have ended up possessing you.
That completely reframes the concept of divine judgment. It isn't an arbitrary punishment handed down by an angry deity. It's the natural, inevitable consequence of your own actions. You are sitting at the forge right now, year by year, weaving your own chain.
It's self-inflicted.
That is far more terrifying,
Yeah.
but also kind of empowering, because it implies you have the agency to stop forging those links.
It returns the agency to the human being, aligning perfectly with the concept of free will we discussed earlier.
What about chapter 72? The entire chapter is titled The Jinn. Modern listeners hear the word jinn, and the immediate cultural association is a genie in a magic lamp, or invisible ghosts. A rationalist reads that and immediately checks out, assuming the text has abandoned philosophy for fairy tales.
This is perhaps the best example of where historical discernment is absolutely necessary. While broader Islamic tradition certainly discusses unseen or ethereal beings, the scholarly commentary for this specific chapter takes a deeply grounded historical approach. We have to look at the linguistic root of the Arabic word jinn.
What does it mean?
It comes from a root meaning concealed, hidden, or covered.
So how does that apply to the story in the chapter where a group of jinn listen to the Qur'an and are amazed by it?
The commentary identifies this specific group as a foreign human tribe, specifically referencing the Jews of Nisibis. In 7th century Arabia, the social fabric was entirely dictated by known tribal lineages. If you encountered a group of foreigners, travelers whose lineage, homeland, and customs were completely unknown to you, they were socially hidden.
I see.
Arabs of that time frequently used the term jinn to describe foreign populations or the bulk of mankind outside their known world, simply because those people were concealed from their everyday reality. reality.
That changes the entire nature of the chapter. It's not a spooky ghost story about spirits eavesdropping on a prophet. It is a story about cross-cultural connection.
Exactly. Spiritual resurrection isn't limited by geography or local tribal politics. The fact that foreigners, the hidden people, understood and accepted this message before the prophet's own neighbors proves that the self-accusing spirit is universal human hardware, not just a local cultural software. It's a profound statement about breaking down tribal barriers.
Yeah, there is another striking metaphor in chapter 76 regarding paradise. It describes the righteous drinking from cups mixed with camphor and zanjabil, which is ginger.
Right.
Again, the literalist reading makes it sound like God is just a very specific mixologist serving botanical mocktails in the afterlife. What is the actual mechanism being described here?
The commentary unpacks the symbolic meaning of these specific plants based on how they were utilized in that ancient desert environment. Camphor, or kafir, is famous for its intense cooling properties.
Like icy hot or something.
Exactly. Medically, in that context, it was used to suppress poisonous matter, inflammation, or fever. In the text, drinking a cup mixed with camphor symbolizes the first necessary stage of spiritual perfection, the complete cooling of earthly, evil, poisonous passions.
It's the suppression of the ego. You have to cool down the anger, the greed, the hasty temperament we talked about earlier.
You apply the camphor to the fever of the ego. But merely suppressing evil isn't enough to achieve spiritual perfection.
Because then you're just doing nothing.
Right. Suppressing evil just makes you neutral. You aren't doing harm, but you aren't doing good either. Therefore, the second stage involves zanjabil, or ginger. Ginger generates heat, energy, and physical strength. This symbolizes the active, potent spiritual energy required to ascend to higher virtues.
You need the fuel to actually go out and do the heavy lifting of social justice.
Yes. It is the heat you need to go out and feed the orphan when you are exhausted, or to stand up to a figure like Walid bin Mughira when you are terrified. You need the camphor to stop doing harm and the ginger to start doing good.
The obstacle for the modern listener is getting trapped by the outer shell of the metaphor. If you spend your time arguing about the metallurgical properties of a 70-cubit chain, or whether the gin are made of smokeless fire, or looking for recipes for ginger drinks, you completely miss the enduring wisdom.
You miss the forest for the trees.
The text is utilizing the vivid physical imagery of its time, the cooling nature of camphor to a desert dweller, to explain universal, timeless truths about mastering human psychology.
The imagery is merely the vehicle. The mastery of the human soul is the destination.
So let's transition to the practical application of that mastery. We have the destination. Master the ego, cool the destructive passions, generate the heat for virtue, and refuse to hoard your resources. That is an incredibly tall order, especially when the society around you is hostile.
It's extremely difficult.
So how exactly did this text advise the prophet to build that capacity on a daily basis? What is the practical how-to manual for spiritual endurance?
For the practical methodology, we return to chapter 73, Al-Muzammil, the chapter of the wrapped up. The prophet is given a highly specific and frankly grueling initial instruction. He is commanded to stay awake for half the night or even 2/3 of the night, engaged in deep prayer, recitation, and reflection.
Wait, staying awake for 2/3 of the night? That is extreme sleep deprivation.
It is.
If you try to function on 2 hours of sleep, your cognitive abilities just collapse. Why mandate such an intense, physical demanding protocol?
The text explains the psychological rationale behind the command. It states that the rising by night is the firmest way to tread and the best corrective of speech. The mechanism here relies on the profound isolation of the night.
Because everyone else is asleep.
Exactly. In the darkness, there are no critics shouting at you in the public square. There is no commerce, no social posturing, no distractions. The noise of the world is muted. It is only in that absolute unbroken silence that a person can receive and process what the text calls a weighty word.
A weighty word. A truth heavy enough to anchor you.
And notice how the text pivots immediately to contrast the night with the day. It says, surely you have in the daytime a long occupation. The day is inherently chaotic. It is filled with the demands of survival, arguments, stress, and societal pressure.
The long occupation.
Yeah.
That perfectly describes the 9-to-5 grind.
Doesn't it? If you do not anchor yourself in the profound silence of the night, the long occupation of the day will simply sweep you away. You will lose your grounding. You won't have the spiritual fortitude, the ginger, so to speak, to maintain your sublime morality when the crowd starts calling you a madman again.
The contrast with our modern routines is staggering. I mean, if you look at the massive trend of morning routines today, every productivity guru tells you to wake up at 4 a.m., take an ice bath, journal, and meditate.
The hustle culture morning routine?
Right. But the underlying why is entirely different. Modern hustle culture tells you to wake up early to maximize your efficiency, to outwork your competitors, and to increase your wealth. They want you to build a bigger garden to hoard.
More profits.
The ancient wisdom here is demanding that you wake up in the night to strip away your attachment to that wealth. You wake up in the dark to dismantle the ego so that you can survive the daytime with your soul intact, not so you can conquer the stock market.
The modern routine amplifies the self. This ancient vigil dissolves it.
But I have to point out the reality of human limitation here. The prophet might have had the sheer willpower to maintain a schedule of praying for 2/3 of the night. But if that is the universal standard for spiritual resurrection, the rest of us are going to fail immediately. I mean, I would last 2 days.
Oh, me too. And the text recognizes that completely. It demonstrates a remarkable degree of divine mercy and practical realism. By the end of chapter 73 and verse 20, that intense, grueling command is explicitly relaxed or abrogated.
Oh, really? It dials it back.
Yes. The text acknowledges the physical and societal limitations of human beings. It essentially says, God knows that you pass in prayer nearly 2/3 of the night, but he also knows that among you there will be the sick, there will be those traveling the land seeking bounty, which means engaging in essential commerce, and there will be those fighting to defend themselves.
So life happens. People get sick. People have to earn a living to feed their families. The long occupation is unavoidable.
Therefore, the new instruction is radically simplified and accessible, it says. Therefore, read what is easy of the Qur'an. Just do what is manageable for your current capacity.
That's a huge relief.
It is, but it follows that immediately with the non-negotiables. Keep up prayer and pay the poor rate.
It always loops back to the poor rate. Even in the middle of a discourse on midnight meditation and spiritual mysticism, it violently yanks you back to the physical reality of paying your share to society.
Because internal devotion without external charity is a defunct mechanism. The inward reflection of the night must translate into outward generosity during the day.
So the practical practice derived from this isn't that you must stay awake until 4 a.m. every night. But you must carve out some fraction of time in the extreme quiet before the long occupation of your day begins. You need a dedicated moment to evaluate your own weighty word.
Right, whatever that looks like for you.
The reflection for the listener is this. Are you grounding yourself in your core values before you look at your phone, before you answer the first email, before the world starts demanding your compliance? You have to find your silence before the noise finds you.
That is the daily maintenance required for spiritual endurance.
But this raises a final, crucial problem. You adopt the daily practice, you listen to the self-accusing spirit, you stop hoarding, you speak your truth, and yet the world just remains broken.
Right.
The societal elites still mock you, the people don't listen. How long are you supposed to endure when there are zero tangible results?
It's the ultimate test of patience.
And the text answers this psychological dilemma by pulling in two massive historical archetypes from broader wisdom traditions, Noah and Jonah.
The contrast between Noah and Jonah in these chapters provides a masterclass in the psychology of endurance. Let's look at Noah first in chapter 71. Most modern listeners associate Noah solely with the ark and the flood, but the focus here is entirely on his psychological resilience and his sheer, unyielding persistence in the face of failure.
Chapter 71 depicts Noah preaching night and day. He is offering his people a clear way out of their destructive behavior. He even tries to appeal to their self-interest, telling them that aligning with the truth will bring them tangible benefits, literal rain, abundance of wealth, and children. He's connecting the moral laws to the physical laws.
And the response of his people is the ultimate picture of willful physical ignorance. The text says they literally thrust their fingers into their ears and they cover themselves with their garments so they don't even have to look at him. They are puffed up with pride.
It is the ancient equivalent of a child putting their hands over their ears and screaming to avoid hearing a reprimand. But Noah doesn't stop. He preaches in public, he preaches in private, he persists for an unimaginable length of time. He seems to be the ultimate model of detaching from the outcome.
That is the core mechanism of his endurance. He understands that he is responsible solely for the action, the delivery of the message, not for the result. The stubbornness of the audience does not dictate the value of his work.
And the stark cautionary contrast to Noah is found in chapter 68 with Jonah. The prophet in Mecca is given a very specific, pointed warning. Wait patiently for the judgment of your Lord, and be not like the companion of the fish.
Right, the companion of the fish being Jonah.
What was Jonah's specific psychological failure in this context?
His failure was impatience driven by despair. Jonah was given a mission to warn his people. When they didn't listen immediately, when the results didn't materialize on his timeline, he didn't endure like Noah. He grew frustrated, he became angry at their stubbornness, he despaired of any positive outcome, and he abandoned his post. He fled, which led directly to his distress inside the fish.
If we look at the mechanics of Jonah's despair, it's deeply tied to ego, isn't it? He wanted to be right, and he wanted to be proven right immediately. When delayed gratification breaks human resolve, it's usually because our motivation was tied to the applause or the success of the outcome, rather than the intrinsic value of the action itself.
The wisdom here is directed squarely at the prophet in Mecca, and, by extension, to anyone attempting to enact meaningful change in a broken world. Do not let the lack of immediate results push you into the despair of Jonah. Despair is the mechanism that causes you to abandon the mission entirely. You must have the persistence of Noah, who kept speaking truth even to an audience that plugged their ears.
Whether you are working for social justice, trying to build an ethical company in a corrupt industry, or simply trying to raise good kids, you are going to hit massive walls of stubbornness. People will put their fingers in their ears. If your internal engine runs solely on their immediate transformation or their gratitude, you will burn out and run away. Your anchor has to be the action itself, the weighty word, not the applause.
The long, slow, often completely unrewarded work of spiritual and societal resurrection requires severing your dependency on immediate vindication.
This brings us to a final, incredibly provocative thought to leave you with as we close this deep dive. In chapter 74, the text outlines the final trial, and it lists the faults of those who failed. They didn't feed the poor. We have explored the mechanics of that extensively, but it adds another highly specific failure that feels eerily targeted at the 21st century. It says they entered into vain discourses with those who entered into vain discourses.
Vain discourses, empty, pointless, cyclical arguments that produce no tangible good.
Think about the attention economy we live in today. Think about the endless scrolling, the vicious social media fights, the Reddit echo chambers, the manufactured outrage of the 24-hour news cycle. We are practically drowning in vain discourse.
It's everywhere.
The question this text forces upon us is this: how much of our finite, precious lives, our 70 years, our 70 links of the chain, are spent engaging in pointless arguments with people who are entirely committed to misunderstanding us? And while we are obsessing over winning a rhetorical fight online, how many actual captives and poor are standing right outside our doors, completely ignored?
It is a devastating diagnostic question. The ultimate test outlined in these chapters isn't just about what abstract theological concepts you gave mental assent to. It is profoundly about where you directed your finite attention and your material resources in the physical world. Did you build your garden just for yourself, or did you purposefully leave the gate open? Did you wrap yourself in a cloak when the world got difficult, or did you arise and face the messiness of humanity?
You cannot just read the text. You have to let the text read you. You have to let the self-accusing spirit do its uncomfortable, life-saving work.
Well said.
That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.